All right, Joel Gausten here from joelgausten.com. For this conversation, I'm joined by quite possibly the busiest man in rock and roll at the moment, and we'll get into that for many reasons. But it's my great pleasure to welcome joining me from Los Angeles, Mark Gemini Twaite. Mark, how are you? Good to see you.
I'm good, Joel. Thank you. How are you doing?
Doing okay. Envious of your nice weather out there on the West Coast, but
Yeah. It's we just had a little mini heat wave this last weekend actually, where it got crazy. It got into the 90s. I think it got into the upper 90s if you're in central LA. I'm out near Santa Monica, so I get the sea. I like the sea breeze. It kind of brings the temperatures down about 10 degrees or so out here. And there's a lot of Brits actually that seem to live around Santa Monica, and I wonder if it's all that we're gravitating away from the heat. I don't know.
right, right. Well, watch out for the earthquakes all the same. So.
Yeah, definitely. Always waiting for the big one.
Yeah, I was in a couple not so big ones, but big enough. When you're in one, there's no such thing as a small earthquake, I've learned. So
Right. Yeah, I've experienced a few tremors, and obviously being British, it's a new experience. It's not new anymore because I've lived here for 20 years. But yeah, it was a new experience to sort of be in a build. I was in a building once and at the Fox Pico lot, the TV and movie studios, and I was on the fourth floor, and all of a sudden, it suddenly felt like I was on a ship, and the whole building seemed to be doing this. And
yeah,
yeah, when you're on a ship and you can feel it, and I was like, what? And obviously, I realized that, yeah, everybody was like, oh, wow, wow, earthquake, earthquake. And thankfully, it was a fairly mild and brief tremor. But I realized if this was one of the big ones, the 8.0 or whatever, and I'm on the fourth floor of a building, I'm probably in big trouble.
Hmm.
So it's kind of a wake-up call, definitely.
Yeah, I've certainly been there myself. But we're not here to discuss natural disasters. We're here to talk about music. And you have
Although it's a nice tie-in because the name of our new album is you know I've forgotten what's it called? Yeah, A Crash Course in Catastrophe. So actually, that was the perfect lead-in.
There you go. Fantastic. Didn't even realize that. So thank you.
You're a genius, mate.
But as you said, the album's called A Crash Course in Catastrophe, and the band we're referring to is Sevendials. For those who are unaware, this is a new project, or at least new to the world project, featuring yourself, a one-time bandmate of mine in decades past, Chris Connelly, on vocals, and on drums, Big Paul Ferguson, a name that has come up quite a bit on this channel in recent times. The three of you have a full-length album out under that title. And at the time of this recording, we're a couple days away from this release, but when the video posts, it will be out in the world. You have an EP coming out on May 16th. It's a cover of the song Obsession by Animotion, classic
That's
80s.
right. Pop classic.
Yeah, absolutely. So, let's kind of start with the new release coming up. One thing I always like to focus on when I have a guest who has such a history like you have is, well, I like to kind of start in the here and now because I always feel it's lovely to talk about the past, but we all live in the present. So, starting hitting the ground running with what's coming up in a couple of days. This new EP, Animotion, classic song of the 80s. So let's kind of start there before diving into the Seven Dials thing. Why choose that particular song as a cover?
I've got a bit of a history of covering pop music. On my first solo album that I put out in 2016, I covered an ABBA song, Knowing Me, Knowing You. I got my friend Vile Vallo from him to sing on it. And it raised a lot of eyebrows because I just had this idea of, oh, I had this recurring reminder in my calendar that was dark, brooding, gothic version of Knowing Me, Knowing You. And one day I demoed it because I decided to do a solo album. I was like, okay, here's a reason to do it. And then I approached people like Vile to sing on it. And so I heard it in my head as this kind of gothic interpretation, kind of like my old band, The Mission. Like imagine The Mission covering a song like that. And The Mission used to cover various old pop hits from the 70s as well, you know, so there's a bit of a history of that. So, so I had some pretty good success with that cover and it came out really well. I don't know, it's over 4.5 million views now on YouTube. So it went down really well, over 1 million plays on Spotify. And so that gave me a taste for like doing covers. And I on the follow-up solo album, I did a cover of Love Action by Human League
Hmm.
and also soft cell song, say goodbye, say hello, wave goodbye. And again, these are all songs that were in the pop pantheon of like the 80s. Actually, the ABBA one was late 70s. But so yeah, when it came to doing the Seven Dials record, initially myself and Chris Connelly, we were just writing and coming up with stuff. I then drafted in Paul from Kelly and Joke because I'd been working with Paul on his solo album at the time, and Chris was. I was thinking of us just putting out like an EP. This is before we had a band name or anything. I was like, yeah, let's just put out a few tracks as an EP. And Paul was like quite insistent that we do an album's worth. And in my experience, the quickest way to get, go from say 4 tracks, which we had, to get to 10 tracks, which I would consider to be a reasonable album, was like, let's throw some covers on there. And I've got this history of doing covers. I had 2 covers on my second out solo album, 2 covers on my first solo album. And so I'd been working on, I'd always wanted to do the Obsession cover. And I heard that song again in the Maxine soundtrack, the movie that came out last year. And I said to my wife, Ashley, who's also a DJ in Los Angeles, she does a lot of the goth clubs and kink events and stuff like that. She just DJed at the Vampire Ball in Vegas. And I said to her, oh, I can hear like a kind of an electronic industrial heavy version of this song, but like a remix. And so I grabbed the original and I used like AI to like separate, stuff like the vocals and instrumentation. And I kind of broke it down and I added all new drums and added a bunch of heavier guitars. And, I was able to control the mix because we had the vocal on an isolated track. And I did her like a remix version of it. And so when Seven Dials were scrambling to try and come up with enough material for a full record, I was like, well, why don't I just take off all the animation elements, take off the original vocal, um, add my own elements, yeah, basically just recreating synth parts and stuff like that, and then get Chris to sing it. And that's the version that you hear on the album. It's kind of an arrangement that I came up with, and I ended up getting Ashley, my wife, to sing on it because I was like, well, it's got a female vocal on there. I hadn't really given it any great deal of thought. I was like, oh, we got a female vocal here, and I'd already recorded Ashley for her solo material that she put out. So I was like, yeah, well, do you want to have a go at singing on this song? She was obviously well familiar with it because I'd already created this remix for her. So it kind of felt very organic in a way to stick it on the album. I'd already been like working on it and breaking it down and recreating it and expanding it. And we also covered a Sparks hit from 1979, #1 song in heaven. And that again was another reminder that had been coming up in my Google Calendar for probably about a couple of years, like, sort of heavy industrial version of #1 song in heaven. And once Chris said, let's do an album, I was like, right, well, let's get the covers going. And here we are. So yeah, Obsession comes out as a dedicated standalone single this Friday, the 16th, in a couple of days. And it was on the album, so people have all heard it already, but the single's gonna be with a video premiere, and we're all in the video, including Ashley, so that's great. And we got Youth, the Killing Joke bass player and noted producer and remixer himself. He wanted to do a couple of remixes for it because we put this album out on Youth's label with Alan McGee. Creation Youth is the label name. So yeah, Youth came up with these really cool electronic, dancey, club remixes, and so they're bonus tracks on the EP.
Excellent. Well, it's nice to see youth finally get some work.
Yeah, he was, yeah, he seemed a bit neglected. So I sort of gave him a call and just gave him a bone.
Fantastic.
But yeah, he was quite too busy working with Paul McCartney and the like. And I was like, no,
Yeah,
no, no, get all that McCartney palaver. Come and remix my song. Thank you.
fantastic. Well, as youth would say, yeah, man.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, we actually had a playback. I was in London in last December. I was doing some shows with a British band called The Wonder Stuff, who I've been playing with for about 5 or 6 years. And we were at the Shepherd's Bush Empire, and Youth was like, "Yeah, I've got remixes together. You should come over and check it out." So right after the sound check, I jumped in a taxi and went down to Youth's place in yes, at Greenwich around there, south of the Thames. And of course, the spliff was out and the speakers were loud and it sounded fantastic. I could really feel his enthusiasm for it. And I was like, yeah, this is going to be great when this comes out.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And one thing that I find interesting, and certainly being an LA resident for the past several years, the world is incredibly small.
Yeah.
And even in the collaboration we're talking about with Seven Dials, Chris and Paul worked together in Murder Inc. You've worked with Paul, you know, um, Youth is in the picture. So there's a lot of interconnection as always. What I'm always fascinated by is although it can be in some cases similar characters or even the same characters, the projects are all so unique. There's
Right,
a
right.
spin on
Yeah.
it. And yeah, I think Seven Dials has its own unique vibe. And certainly one that I think's benefited by, in my opinion, one of Connelly's strongest vocal performances on record in quite a while.
Yeah, a lot of people have been saying that this is some of Chris's strongest work. I mean, I'm always impressed with everything he does, but yeah, he really was, knocking it out of the park, as I say, on these recordings. And I think he had a lot of fun with songs like the Sparks cover, which was my suggestion, and the Obsession cover, which was again my suggestion. But he was really open to it, and of course, he's famous for covering songs himself. Like. Do you think I'm sexy and all that, Rod Stewart. And so it's fun to sort of present somebody like Chris Connelly with a new challenge, and he certainly rose to the challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. So, of course, to the viewer who's yet to check out this music, I will include all pertinent links in the video description to do so. It's fun stuff. The animation covers a lot of fun. The new EP is great. I mean, come on, it's got Connolly singing Animotion remixed by Youth. I mean, what more could you possibly want?
Yeah, I think that's the thing we wanted people to take away from it is yeah, we're from these doom and gloom bands like Killing Joke and The Mission and Revolting Cocks and so on, but in actual fact we're just having a lot of fun with these covers. You can hear our tongues firmly in our cheeks on the Sparks cover and the Obsession cover, but we're having a lot of fun with it. I let Paul was saying he would never have thought to have covered a song like an animation song, a pop hit. Certainly not back in the day, but he said once he heard like how I reinterpreted it, because I kind of gave him a version with programmed drums and they were heavy and powerful, and I was like, mate, can you like bring what you bring to this track? He had a lot of fun with it, and I think we all really enjoyed it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it comes through, I mean,
Yeah,
music is supposed to be uplifting at times, and even the doomy and gloomy and stuff can be uplifting as well. I mean, we both know that.
yeah, we got some dark stuff on there, knife before asking, and wolves. Which its full title was Where the Wolves Fuck. So interesting lyrics there for Chris. And yeah, and Before You Make Your Distance. These are all kind of dark, brooding songs, corrupted verse. But then you got some I won't say lightweight, that's the wrong word. You got some lighter fare,
Mm.
such as the cover songs and Whispering Wand is one of my favorites, which is it almost starts off like some kind of bluegrass country riff, and then it kind of morphs into this eclectic wall of noise. And then you got like classic rock overtones of Zodiac Morals, where to me, I wanted to kind of evoke Led Zeppelin and bands like that. And that's not really something you normally would equate with, say, Chris Connelly,
Mm.
you know, or Paul. But I feel that Paul brings this immense drum power that it kind of it echoes Bonham in a way. They're coming from the same school of drumming in a way to me.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the whole thing works very well. It's a Fantastic combination. It's the right combination. When we talk about supergroups, sometimes it comes off sounding like what it is, disparate puzzle pieces thrown into
Yeah.
a bowl. But it's not the case at all with Seven Dials. It fits beautifully like a glove on this record and the new EP that's coming out, or more accurately, will be out by the time the video.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, we don't consider ourselves a super group. We're just a bunch of guys from some alternative rock bands, and but yeah, I think there's an organic. There's a way. The fact that like Chris and I were already working together around 2017. We were working on a primitive race record together, and
Right.
that was a bunch of different industrial musicians kind of adding songs and performances to a pool. And Chris and I ended up collaborating on a couple of tracks there, and that led to us doing another cover of How Long, which is a 70s, kind of Motown-esque kind of tune. How long has this been going on? We did a kind of industrially gothy version of that together. And then at the same time as all of that, I was collaborating with Big Paul on his two solo records. So it kind of just felt very natural to me. Hey, I'm working with this guy, and I'm working with this guy, and Chris and Paul had worked together already anyway, years before, with Murder Inc. and stuff like that, and Chris did Damage Manual as well.
Mm,
And so yeah, it just felt very organic for us to kind of go, hey, let's get Paul on these tracks. That's what happened.
absolutely. Um, do you know who wrote the first ever Primitive Race press release?
I'm going to say you because
All
that's
right.
just, why else would you ask me?
That's right.
Yeah. All right. Well, there you go. Yeah. So I was involved with that from ground zero. So and in fact, we had Chris Kanicka. Oh yeah, yeah, a couple of tracks on the Sevendials record were kind of demos that Chris Kanicka and I had like come up with that were, could have potentially been on the next Primitive Race album that just never happened. And I'd come up, it's like primarily my riffs and stuff, and I wanted to work with them and see what Chris and Paul brought to it. But I kept Chris Knicker's bass on there, and obviously co-write credits and stuff. So yeah, Chris actually, you got a little bit of Primitive Race going on the Sevendials on a couple of tracks, Too High to Live and Knife Without Asking, which yeah has Chris on bass, and they've got some. Again, it's all the little threads, connecting all the bands together.
Right, absolutely. Um, when I knew we were going to be doing this, I struggled a bit because I already knew quite a bit about your history going into this conversation, but I dug a bit deeper, and the dilemma is always going to be how, what do we hit on and how deeply do we hit on it? So there's a lot of things I'd love to pick your brain about. We'll do our best to see how much we can get through in this chat because your history, as I've said, it's deep, man. It's deep, and I've seen you perform with a lot of different acts over the years and have a lot of recordings of yours here over the years as well. So I've got my fanboy questions on the ready. But to kind of bring things back to, well before the present tense, am I correct that the first real sort of you're hitting the ground running in a working band came in the late 80s via Dave Roberts from Sex Gang Children?
Yeah, yeah. So I'm originally from Birmingham, England. Land of home of heavy metal,
Yes.
as we like to say, and born in the same hospital as Ozzy Osbourne. So yeah, I've got the metal in my blood, as they say. But that aside, yeah, I ended up struggling away in the sort of most of the 80s, trying to get somewhere, in bands in the Birmingham area, and just kind of didn't get anywhere. And then I met a girl who lived in London, Jazz, and I ended up, cut a long story short, yeah, the lights of London and the gold paved roads were calling. And so I ended up dating her for a few months and then moving down to London. And then shortly after I moved to London, I applied to an ad in the Melody Maker, which no longer exists, unfortunately, a British music paper. And it was like, name band looking for lead guitarist. I can't remember what the rest of it said. And I applied to it, just intrigued with the name band thing. And it was Dave from Sex Gang Children, who'd left Sex Gang and was forming this new band called The Children. So definitely an offshoot. And that was kind of my first foray into sort of playing with some guys on the alternative scene that had a bit of a name. And the drummer in that band, Bobby Ray, who was an American actually living in London, who was from the Philadelphia area, he used to play in a band called MDMA. And Bobby was also drumming with he'd been jamming with, well, firstly he was jamming with Paul Raven, who was not in Killing Joke at that time. This was like around 89 maybe. And he invited me to go and jam with Raven. They were talking about doing maybe a Hellfire Club kind of lineup thing. So I almost ended up playing in a band with Raven, which actually did happen down the line, but that's another story. We did mob research together. But yeah, in 89, I was jamming with Raven and with Bobby. But Bobby Ray was also jamming with Kurt Brandon, who is the singer of British band Spear of Destiny,
Sure.
and also was frontman for Theatre of Hate, which predates Spear of Destiny. And so it's because of the children, after being in them for about a year, and Bobby saying, "Hey, why don't you come and jam with Kurt Brandon? He's looking for a guitarist, and he's reforming new lineup of Spear of Destiny because they'd broken up." And so I ended up joining Spear of Destiny. So I didn't stay in the children very long. I joined Spear of Destiny, and that was kind of, I felt like really my proper arrival into professional. This was a band that had some like top 30 hits in the UK, and Spirit Destiny that is, and we played like 3 sold-out nights at the Marquee with this new lineup in 1990, and that was just fantastic. That really felt like, oh yeah, yeah, sort of getting on the map now. And then I did a tour the following year with the Reformed Theatre of Hate, a 10th anniversary tour. Billy Duffy from the Cult used to be the lead guitarist on the touring version of Theatre of Hate, and he was obviously busy, so I got asked to be the lead guitarist on that Theatre of Hate tour. So that was fun. And then after that, I ended up joining the Mission. So yeah, I felt like moving to London and joining. It felt very organic, joining the children, and then that led to an organic joining with Spear. And then because I had that stuff on my resume when I heard the Mission were looking for a guitarist, I felt like I had enough to offer to apply for that. Although, they advertised in the music press, the Mission did, that they were after a guitarist. And I felt like everybody and their sister was going to apply, but I thought, what the hell? And I ended up getting shortlisted to audition.
Now, were you the direct replacement for Simon in the Mission? Did you cut
Um,
away?
well, I was, it's a bit blurred. I mean, yes, I was Simon Hinkler's replacement. However, he had left the Mission. This was 92 that I joined the Mission. He had left the Mission abruptly 2 years before in 1990. They finished off at the start of like an American tour. They finished off that tour with I think the Guitar Tech on guitar. Um, I know they did a tour with a guy called Wolfie, and then Simon came back in 1991. They did like a festival, Finsbury Park Festival, with Killing Joke actually and New Model Army, and I guess it didn't work out. And then in '92 they advertised for a guitarist, and I got the gig. So if you're looking at the records, then yeah, it went from Simon on guitar to me on guitar. But there was a couple of tours, I think, where they had like different guitarists on board.
Mm.
But yeah, on the records, I guess I was sort of Simon's replacement, and did like the next 4 albums with the band, the next 4 studio albums, and a bunch of live records as well.
Now, you would know better than I would, certainly, but it seems to me during that time that, second half of the 90s for the Mission, it kind of struck me as sort of an on and off affair for a bit there. It was kind of it was rolling and then it would pause for a bit and then it would kind of spring up again and it would kind of go away for a while. Do I have that right?
Yeah, we did a couple of albums, a Neverland album, which we spent a couple of years recording. So we started recording that in late '92, well, demoing it in late '92. into 93. We changed bass players. We had a new bassist called Andy Hobson,
Mm,
who'd been playing with the Pretenders, and he wasn't working out. Amazing bass player, but he just didn't seem quite right for the vibe of what they were after, what Wayne and Mick Brown, the drummer, were after. So we ended up getting Andy Cousin, who was the bassist in a band called All About Eve. And
sure.
then once Andy joined in the summer of '93, it kind of gelled and it suddenly made sense. And then we sort of carried on with the recording sessions into '94. And then I think we released the first single from that album at Neverland, probably at the end of '94. I know actually there was a greatest hits that came out, Sum and Substance. That came out in '94 and it
Right.
included a couple of new tracks. So that was kind of like my first appearance on a Mission record proper.
Mm,
Although we did do a flexi disc the year before that came out to the fan base. Um, and so yeah, some Substance came out, and then the Neverland album came out very early the following year, not early '95. So I'd actually been in the band like 3 years by the time that album came out. So it wasn't new to me, but it kind of introduced me to the world at large as the Mission's guitarist. And then we did the Blue album the following year. And then Wayne Hussey decided that he wanted to move to America and that he wanted to take a break from the Mission and just rock and roll in general. So we did some farewell shows and the band split late '96, and then Wayne went to live in America.
mhm.
I ended up being invited to audition for Tricky's band the
Right.
following year. And so I got the gig as Tricky's guitarist, which was quite a bizarre, you know, thing to get as a gothic rock guitarist. Turns out Tricky was a huge fan of like Susie and the Mission and gothic rock and that. He's got a very eclectic taste. So he thought it was cool that I actually came from that background. And he would assemble his band members like, he wanted different flavors. So we had like a black drummer, Perry from Aswad, proper reggae band.
Right, right.
We had a girl on bass, Carrie, who played in Babylon Zoo, who were like alternative. And then you had me from Gothic rock background and Gareth, the keyboard player, who was a very accomplished pianist. And we were quite an eclectic mix of musicians.
And you're on the Mission Accomplished EP from Tricky.
Yeah, that was my first recording. Yeah, we so I joined Tricky's band in '98. This is when the Mission had split up. And getting back to your point there was, yeah, Wayne ended up reforming the Mission in '99. I guess he had the itch after 3 years,
Mm,
and he'd been approached to do a US tour with Gene Does Jezebel and Mike Peters of the Alarm. God bless his soul, he just passed away. Um, so Wayne called me and said, "Hey, Craig Adams, the original Mission and Sisters of Mercy bassist, was like, let's go and do this tour. Let's get the band back together." And I got the call to do that tour. At this time, I was in Tricky still. I joined Tricky in '98, and that touring went into '99. And the Mission Accomplished EP, I think we recorded that in '99. It came out either late '99 or early 2000, and that was the first sort of record I was on with Tricky. Pretty fun time to do that. And then I was on the Blowback album, which came out in 2001. And those sessions kind of started in 2000 as well. And at the same time, I was back in a reformed Mission who had gone from, hey, let's just do a US tour and have some fun. And then we ended up doing some European dates. And then it was like, let's do a new album. So then I was kind of juggling both bands. And it was like having two girlfriends at the same time.
right, right. I
But
have I have a very special relationship with Mission Accomplished because the release of that EP coincided with the start of my career in journalism.
oh,
I bring this up because my first job out of the gate after school was managing editor for a music magazine. So one of the first things I did was contact Epitaph Records, which was Anti as well, the sub label that put out Tricky.
yeah,
I said, "Hey, you now have a friend at our magazine. Send me all your stuff," right? So they sent me a ton of records, including Tricky. This was the time when I was first introduced to being a working writer, which means all-nighters.
yeah.
And that's been true to this day, 25 years later. So it was the first time being in an office, trying to hit a deadline. It doesn't matter what time of the night it is, you've got to get the work done. So I remember the first few all-nighters I pulled, listening to that EP on repeat. It's only four songs, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, that is so ingrained in my DNA. I listened to it again recently, knowing we would be reconnecting, and it just brought back so many memories of that time and the beginnings of all the things I still do to this day. So I absolutely adore that record. So tell
Oh,
me a
great.
bit about, the sessions, not just that particular release, but working with Tricky in the studio to do the material you produced together.
Yeah, I mean, Tricky, the way he works, well, when I joined his band, he was actually going through a phase where he really enjoyed letting us band members like jam out ideas. So he might come up with like a beat, and obviously a vocal, maybe some samples that he stuck together. That's kind of how Tricky would write stuff, was a lot of sticking samples together because he wasn't a musician per se, but like total genius in the studio, and he really knew how to sort of juxtapose disparate samples and just make it sound really fresh and original. And obviously his lyrics were brilliant, delivery. And then he would kind of bring the band in and we would like jam out and flesh out these ideas. So yeah, when I was in Tricky's band, there was quite a lot of encouragement to sort of bring what I had to the table, riffage, sounds, experimentation. And I remember the Mission Accomplished EP, we recorded that stuff in New York. Um, I'm trying to remember the name of the studio, but it was like a famous studio. We did those sessions there. He also got me. He remixed Method Man,
Hmm.
and I got pulled in to like add guitars to a tricky Method Man remix, and that was quite surreal to end up on a Method Man release. A lot of fun with that. I was doing kind of like a Joe Perry, Walk This Way style riff on it, and yeah, just it's interesting working with Tricky because although he isn't a traditional musician, like he's not picking up a guitar or like playing some chords on piano, he just likes to stick stuff together and just see what works. Kind of, it was very liberating.
Fantastic. To make things even more eclectic, Peter Murphy,
Mm.
if I have my chronology correct, sort of enters the picture around this time as well. So you end up working in Peter's band for quite a bit, right?
Let me think. So yeah, I was in Tricky's band and the Mission at the same time. That kind of rolled into 2000, 2001. Then I had like some tours start to clash with Tricky and the Mission, and I had to pass on a Mission tour that they were going to do to promote the new album that we'd done, an album called Aura that came out in autumn 2001. I was busy booked to do a tour with Tricky and Jane's Addiction,
Mm.
and after that, a tour with Tool. Then that was a special guest at Tool because they were friends with the band, and um, so all of that was going on. And then I didn't join Peter Murphy's band until 2005. So about 4 years later, I joined Peter Murphy's band to promote his Unshattered album, which came out that year. And at that time, I was still in Tricky's band. I was no longer in the Mission because I kind of had a falling out with them um, because of the tour clashing and stuff like that. But ironically, that same year, I did get a call from Wayne Hussey asking me to come back and play some South African shows because the guitarist they had on board couldn't do it. And it kind of ushered me back into the band. I ended up rejoining the Mission and then juggling Peter Murphy in the Mission for a few years. And then Wayne Hussey split the Mission up again for the second time in 2008. So we did a big farewell tour. And then Peter was then my sort of main and sole focus for many years, Peter Murphy.
Mm. I believe I saw you with him on the Unshattered tour because if my memory serves, I saw Bauhaus at Coachella, and then within a week's time, maybe even less, he had a solo gig in LA.
Yeah.
I saw both.
Yeah. We were rehearsing in LA with Peter. It was myself, Justin Bennett from Skinny Puppy,
Right.
and Thrill Kill Cult, and a bass player called Jeff Shartoff. And we were rehearsing at Swing House, I think it was, in LA with Peter. And then he was like, "Okay, guys, I've got to go to Coachella and play this show with Bauhaus,"
Mm.
which I really wanted to see the show, but we were kind of, it's quite a trek, right, from LA to Palm, wherever it is, I forget. It's a like 3 hour drive into the desert
Yeah.
and Palm Springs. And so, yeah, we had to carry on rehearsing without Peter knowing that he was playing this triumphant return show where they dropped him from from the ceiling upside down like a bat, to
Yep.
do Bell Lugosi's Dead opening song. It was on it was on Rolling Stone and all that stuff. And I was like, wow, I could have seen this. I'm like Peter Murphy's guitar player, just joined his band. So yeah, we literally went out on tour right after he did Coachella. We then went off and did this solo tour, and I think we played in LA. I think we played. Oh, I can't remember what the venue now, to be honest. But I remember David J. And Kevin Haskins. They both came along, and this was like really me getting to know those guys for the first time. They came along, watched the show, and that was quite exciting for me because I was a huge Bauhaus fan.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Funny enough, fast forward a bit to 2013, I think it was. Peter comes out and does his Bauhaus sort of tribute tour,
Yeah,
35th
we did. I
anniversary.
did that tour, yeah.
And I saw you on the Boston date and
Right.
I met Peter afterwards. And the first thing in my mouth was, how'd you pull off Coachella? Being upside down. So he starts telling me about Pilates. And now like he did all these Pilates to get himself in shape. And I'm thinking, I'm talking to Peter Murphy about Pilates in Boston. That's a sentence for Facebook right there. Uh,
Yeah.
and that tour was fantastic. And I've interviewed all the Love and Rockets guys. They're lovely people. And I think Daniel Ash, personally speaking, is a very um, interesting and underrated guitar player in many ways.
Oh, he's one of the best, To tour with Peter Murphy and get to play or attempt to play, Daniel Ash's iconic parts on that Bauhaus material was definitely a sort of a bucket list thing for me, because I came to it, approached doing those shows with a lot of love for Danny's guitar parts and Bauhaus in general. It's from my youth as well, and it was even more fun when we did it again uh, in 2018, where we had David J on bass.
Hmm.
So it was Peter, David J, so half a Bauhaus, and then me on guitar and Mark Slutsky. And so I got to redo it all again. We'll play a lot of those same songs, but this time I was playing with basically half a Bauhaus, and it was fantastic.
Yeah, I would imagine so. I mean, talk about, that's bucket list kind of stuff. I
It
mean,
was great. It was great. And I did get get a lot of compliments on, to the try, because with Danny, I wasn't so much worrying about, oh, I'm going to play it like try and play it note perfect, because you really can't, it's all in the fingers, and I'm not Daniel Ash. But what I was trying to do was evoke Danny's, like the energy that he brings to it. He's got this angular energy that he brings to his playing, and that's what I tried to bring to it, was that energy. I wasn't using like the same model of amp or the same guitar or anything like that, but I was bringing the energy.
absolutely. Yeah, it was a fun night when I saw that tour in Boston and still have
Yeah.
the posters and the memorabilia from that night and the signed set list from Peter in my kitchen here at the apartment. So uh,
Brilliant.
yeah, fantastic night. When I was thinking back, when did I first start seeing your name and recognizing it as such? I knew of your preceding bands, prior to this, but I think the first time I became aware of who you really were was 2006, 2007, because in those years I was in touch with Paul Vincent Raven quite a bit. Uh,
Right. Yeah.
uh, we'll just put that there on a table. But yeah, I was in touch with Raven, you could imagine. But you guys had Mob Research at the time.
Yeah, so yeah, that was this predates my collaborating with Big Paul. So yeah, I got to so I was, everybody knows I'm a huge Killing Joke fan. Geordie is one of my favorite guitar players, and so yeah, to sort of get to do a band with, I'd played some demos that I'd written to Paul Raven, and he was like, "This is great. We should work on this." And he was like, let's get. I'm working with Corey Clark from Warrior Soul, who I'd never met. He's like, let's get Corey on to sing, and he Raven was playing in Ministry at the time. He wasn't
Right.
actually in Killing Joke at that time. And he was even talking, he played Al Jourgensen, some of the mob research demos before it came out. And Al was like, yeah, you guys can support us next year on tour. So it was all kind of getting lined up, and that's what was going to go down. And then, as you know, Paul sort of dropped dead of a heart attack at like the age of, I think he was 46 or something like that, 44 or 46, pretty young. But as he burnt the candle at both ends, and it wasn't like some massive drugs overdose or anything like that. It just turned out that he had a heart murmur, and he perhaps had just been burning the candle at both ends just a bit too much, and it got the better of him. But yeah, fantastic personality, great gregarious person, like almost like knowing a pirate, And yeah, I'm very proud of the mob research stuff. He died before we completed it, so that luckily we had his bass down, and we had like 9 or 10 songs sequenced in the studio. So I got Corey to finish off his vocals on it all, and we managed to put it out a year or so later. And I'm glad I did. It was a great record, and I wanted people to hear what Paul had been working on before he died.
Yeah, well, I do remember he was very high on that project. He was really
He
in.
was really into it, yeah, really into it. Which was to me, I was like, wow, the bass player from Killing Joke, like, he's really into something that I've come up with. So I was just, yeah, this is great.
Yeah, Raven, man. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. But
Yeah,
when all is said and done, truly, and I've been doing this a long time, either writing about bands, interviewing them, playing in them. Hundreds, if not thousands of people have crossed my path. Uh, Paul Raven, truly one of the more colorful, unforgettable spirits and characters out there. I mean, no, there will not be another even remotely close to that guy. And
oh yeah, it was it was a one-off, and I've yet to meet somebody that didn't like him. You know what I mean? Like everybody respected him and admired him, for his rascally type energy and nature.
yeah, I have this old phone book that has been kicking around for decades now, and I was going through it, and it comes into my life every couple of years. I'll find it in a box somewhere. And just recently, I came across Raven's number in there. And the joke I have with a couple friends is maybe we should call it. He'll probably pick up.
Yeah, yeah, totally, yeah. Yeah, I still miss him, just a real character. And really it's because of Paul Raven that I ended up working with Big Paul, with Paul Ferguson, the Killing Joke drummer, because when I hadn't met Big Paul, but when Raven died and they all went to the funeral together, and I ended up sort of I don't know, somebody put me in touch with Paul, and I said, look, I've been working on this project mob research with Raven before he died, and I'm sure he would have wanted you to check it out, and I'm sure you'd want a copy. It's like one of the last things he did alongside Trapone and Pal, he was recording with those guys when he actually died. Um, and so I sent Paul's like, yeah, definitely, and I sent the album to Paul when it came out, and that sort of struck up a sort of a slow burning friendship that later culminated in Paul Ferguson and I collaborating together. And it's all thanks to working with Paul Raven.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And you mentioned Al. And I
Yeah,
know one of the things you've done with Al, you did a couple of things. You played on a Cox record, and
yeah,
you had also done the Christmas single, um,
yeah,
which
yeah.
was a neat package. I have it here somewhere. It was in like a Christmas stocking. It was a Christmas single, and
Mm.
more significantly for me and my wife at the time, it was an animal rescue charity release.
Right.
which was super cool because I know Al is way into that stuff.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so was that the first official time you and Al sort of connected in the studio to create some?
Trying to think. So, yeah, Raven was like the connection with Al Jourgensen because yeah, he was playing with Ministry. So I got to know Angie Jourgensen, who was Al's wife at the time. This was around 2007, and then Paul died, and I sort of kept in touch with Angie, and she was like, "Oh, if you're ever passing through El Paso, you must come and check out Al's studio, the compound." And I think it ended up culminating in 2009. I was on tour with Peter Murphy, and we had a show in El Paso, but we had a day off the day before. And as often happens with a band on tour, you end up hanging out in the town for the next show. Yeah, so if El Paso is your next show after the day off, that's where you'll be hanging off, is El Paso. And she was like, "Come on down, come and hang out with Al, and he's working on some Revco. Come and check it out." So I went down there, just thinking we were going to be drinking and partying and hanging out with Al Jourgensen. How cool is that? And yeah, checking out his studio, and he had this amazing home. And pretty much within half an hour being there and in the studio, he was like, "Yeah, yeah, fire up Filthy Senoritas." And he was like, "Mark, grab a guitar, put some guitar down." So I literally was like, okay. So I was like on the spot, coming up with some guitar riffs. Um, I think what had happened is, uh, I don't know. Yes, a Sin querying their normal guitarist wasn't around or something. So I was like encouraged to come and put some guitars down, and then Al or Angie was like, "Oh, you guys should like work together. Mark, have you got any ideas?" And I sent some demos that I had kicking around. The the Christmas song was one of them, and it was just like a jangly, sort of Gothic. Almost in my mind, I saw it as something I would submit to the mission. I think I did submit it to the mission when I was in them, and Wayne had said, "Oh, it's too poppy or whatever." He didn't think it was going to fit on that album at that time, and so I was just like sitting on it, and it ended up slipping in with a bunch of demos that I sent Al. Some of the other demos ended up being like mob research stuff later, but or mob research outtakes, I guess. And to my surprise, Al really warms to the jangly one, which became a Christmas song. And I think it was Angie's idea. "Hey Al, you've got your Halloween song. Why don't you do a Christmas song? This one sounds like it could be Christmassy." And so they kind of overdubbed, the usual Christmas bells, and
I,
obviously came up with a lyric about it's always Christmas time, and it's a stroke of genius, and it's really cool. But yeah, I didn't expect the first thing to come out that for me with the legendary king of industrial Al Jourgensen to be a Christmas song. But there you go. And I ended up, recording on the B-sides as well. And we ended up recording, I don't know, half a dozen tracks in Al's studio. And it was going to be for Al Jourgensen's solo album. I think it was going to be Alien Jourgensen or something like that. And at the time, Ministry was no more. He'd kind of put Ministry to bed. This was like 2009, 2010. And I was a big fan of Ministry, and I wanted to do the heavy stuff with Al, but he wanted to do the post punk. He was like, "No, man, you're the guitar player from the Mission and Peter Murphy. I want you to bring that to the table." He was bored of metal. He didn't really want to do metal, and so I was giving him all this post punk jangly stuff, and then the following year, he mentioned that he was thinking of reforming Ministry. And I think he'd fallen out with Sinquirian, and so they wanted a guitarist for a reformed Ministry tour. It was going to be. I'd been recording with Tony Campos, who was playing Ministry, playing bass with Ministry, the Static X bassist, and I'd been playing with Mike Sakia, who sadly passed later. But so I'd already been jamming with these Ministry guys on our solo stuff, and so it sort of seemed organic for him to ask me, "Hey, do you want to join Ministry? We're going to do Wacken next year. They've offered us a load of money." And I'm like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah." So I thought I was going to play with Ministry, which would have been awesome, but I don't know. There was some falling out over songwriting credits or something. It seemed quite stupid at the time, and I didn't talk to Al didn't hear from Al for a while, and then Sin came back, which was good because Sin it had been Sin Quirin's gig for a while anyway, so I respected that. And so yeah, I came sort of that close to sort of doing ministry, but I did get to record with Al and Tony and Mike Sakia, so I kind of feel like I almost got in there anyway, you know?
Yeah, I mean that's kind of how it is, it's
Yeah,
same lot, different name some of the time,
yeah,
you know.
yeah, yeah, you know. But it's one of my regrets that I didn't end. If I'd known that we were going to fall out over something stupid like songwriting credits, then that would cost me a potential chance to play with the mighty ministry. I just would have not said anything. I just would have kept my thoughts to myself, you know.
Yeah. I've had two very distinct and very different experiences with Al. Before I started doing this as a video podcast years ago, around the time you were working with Al, I had this as an audio podcast under the same name, the Glorious Noise name. And my wife and I at the time had a dog rescue a special episode with Al for a full hour, just talking about dogs and animal rescue. He said, I don't want to talk about ministry. I want to talk about dogs. We're like, perfect, let's go. And he was a hoot. It was like the last interview of the day. Angie's like, Al's really giving other people a half hour, but he loves the fact you guys want to do a discussion on animal rescue. He'll give you a full hour or whatever else you need. They could not have been cooler to us. But Al was very much in his Uncle Al state of mind at that point, which made for great audio, right? But
Yeah,
he was definitely, yeah, whoa, doing the whole thing.
yeah,
And he was great. Lovely guy. And Angie and I would trade dog photos for a bit afterwards. We became buddies for a bit. But fast forward a few years later, he had put out that surgical meth machine record, which
yeah.
is very heavy stuff.
Very.
And he was with a different label at the time. It wasn't through Angie, it was through someone else who's a friend. So he hooked me up with Al a second time for another interview. And I got him pretty early in the morning. And instead of getting crazy Uncle Al, I got Al,
Yeah,
who presumably sober, focused. There wasn't any like grand theatrics or anything, but frightening with how smart he really is.
yeah,
I could hear the gears spinning in his head as he was talking. This was a guy who was clearly from somewhere else, you
yeah.
know. So I got to see those dual roles where he's, the party guy and then the serious, focused, and just downright frightening with how sharp he is. How much of maybe the latter extreme did you experience working with him where he was in that
Oh,
state, he was
yeah.
full
I mean, hanging out with him in 2009 into 20 and again in 2010. I was getting party Al. You know, that was Al who actually he just had some around the time that I was recording with him. He'd had surgery on his feet. You
on?
know, obviously being an ex-addict, he'd probably been shooting up in his feet, and they had to like do some pretty major stuff down there. I think like amputated toe amputation or something like that. So he'd had these like Terminator style rods installed in his feet because if you lose your toes, your whole
Right.
ability to balance is fucked. You know, you'd be surprised how much you need your toes. So he had to have these Terminator style rods installed, very, very painful, to be able to sort of and then learn to sort of walk on that and all the pain that that involved. So he was self-medicating with booze. Like he wasn't, as far as I'm aware, he wasn't doing, class A drugs at this time, but he was getting seriously hammered on wine, like he'd get up in the morning and be chugging, bottles of wine before lunch, So yeah, I was just really only experiencing, Ali was, partying and drinking to sort of numb the pain and, you know, didn't get to see much of the the laser sharp Al, which I know is in there because the work that he's done is undeniably it was ahead of its time, and he's a very clever gentleman,
Yeah.
and I'm glad that he's back to being laser sharp focused. That's great.
Yeah, and someone who should never be counted out. There are times when
Um,
people say, Al, and then he'll come out with like the best thing he's done in 10 years. And
yeah, Yeah,
always him. And now this, this sort of like he's looking at the older recordings again and giving those a new spin, which
yeah,
sounds fantastic. He says this is the final tour. He's said that before.
he has.
Um, you'll probably
Yeah.
have to drag him off stage in
Wayne Hussey said the same thing. Like he said it to us in 1996. It's like, okay, yeah, calling it a day. Then he said it again in 2008. Okay, I'm calling it a day. So yeah, it's like it's like they're like Kiss, the farewell tour, you know.
yeah, exactly. Kiss, who's
But
playing in November in Vegas, by the way, after the farewell show. But
right, right, and getting back to how strange it felt to be doing you know. The Christmas song without. I guess now that he's revisiting stuff like Halloween and some of the early Revenge era Ministry, the stuff we did together actually totally fits in with that sonic
yeah,
that stuff sonically and stylistically. And so yeah, I was just so used to hearing Ministry as being full on metal and industrial that but now I realize that there's many different tangents to Al and his tastes.
yeah, absolutely. Another irreplaceable character, you cross paths with along the way. I can't
Yeah.
imagine what the bus was like with Al and Raven on it. That
Oh yeah. Insane. Yeah. Insane, definitely. I would have liked, I wished Raven was still around so that we could have done that tour, with Mob Research opening for Ministry. That would have been another bucket list.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Earlier you mentioned All About Eve. And
Right.
I bring that up because in 2016, you released a solo album under the name MGT. The
Yeah.
album is called Volumes. And you mentioned the ABBA cover you did. That's part of that album.
Yeah.
You have some great special guests on that recording. And I'll link that as well in the video description. Definitely, people check out that record. It was one of the best ones of 2016 for sure. My personal highlight on that record is the song with Julianne Regan from All About Eve, who is, I don't need to tell you what she is as a singer. Um,
Amazing. She's amazing. Yeah.
yeah. And when I heard that, when I got the promo for your album and was reading the track listing, obviously that's the first song I listened to. And it was
Right.
such a joy to hear that voice in 2016. It's like I was immediately back in 1988 listening
Yeah.
to my first album of All About Eve on cassette. Martha's Harbor, come on. You know,
Yeah, brilliant, brilliant. Yeah, I was a huge fan of Julianne and All About Eve, and I got to play with the All About Eve bassist Andy Cousin
mhm,
with the Mission for several years, and it was because of Andy that I got to know Julianne, of course, and of course Julianne's career was, and All About Eve's career was intertwined with the Mission. They had the same management. They were kind of discovered sort of by Wayne and Simon Hinkler and so I developed a friendship as well with Julianne, even to the point of during one of the periods where the mission split, this would have been 96, 97. Julianne had a band called Mice, and she got invited to do a festival slot at Phoenix Festival I think it was 97. And she asked me and Andy to play it. So we ended up playing with Julianne at the Phoenix Festival. We did like a warm-up show at the Garage in London where we ended up playing several All About Eve songs. So I got to play some All About Eve with two of the original folks, which was fantastic. Yeah, she's got an amazing voice, and it's quite hard to get her to kind of work on stuff nowadays. And I was very honored that she responded to my the demo that I sent her, which ended up being the song we did together. And she's even done a remix of it because I talked to her a few years ago about maybe releasing like a remixes album of volumes, and she came up with this really cool remix of that song,
mm.
which I'm really hoping that will see the light of day. I'm going to work on that.
Yeah.
And she's been back writing and recording with Tim Brashino, the
mm.
original All About Eve guitarist and songwriter with Julianne, and they've been doing some really good work together, and it's a real pleasure to hear her. still out there doing stuff. Don't mean she's gigging so much, but she's definitely still working in the studio, and it's a delight.
Fantastic. Yeah, I mean that song and everything she sings has always been, you know,
Yeah, she's got one of those magical, ethereal voices, that are just it's a shame they weren't more successful in America, but they were actually a really big deal in England in the late 80s. They were like headlining Glastonbury, and as you know, if you're
yeah,
headlining Glastonbury, you're a big deal, So yeah, they headlined it back in I think 88, I believe, or 87.
yeah.
Yeah,
And for anyone watching this who hasn't heard those records, get on it because
yeah, definitely.
unreal.
Yeah.
Um, I was digging deep into a bit of your history, and maybe you can confirm this because I saw something and I went, huh, interesting. Did you do recording with Grand Theft Audio, the band?
Yeah. Yeah, I
Okay.
did. Yeah, most Americans aren't going to be that familiar with those guys, but that is the band formed by Jay and Rich Battersby, who was a good friend of mine from the Wild Hearts, and he played in one of my little side projects over the years. And Chris McCormack, one of my best friends, was on guitar. Um, and yeah, Jay on vocals. Ralph Jezard was on bass and the producer. He produced some Wild Hearts material. He produced EMF's Unbelievable, stuff like that. So they were like friends of mine on the London scene. I was living in London for many years, and yeah, I was hanging out with them, and they invited me to record some lead guitar on Rock the House, one of their tracks, and had a lot of fun with it. Yeah, and actually they reformed maybe to a couple of years ago, and they invited me to record some guitars on that album as well. So there was a reprise. But yeah, they're great. Anybody who's not heard of Grand Theft Audio, go and check them out. They're like real banging bangers. If you look for the word bangers in the English dictionary, it'll say Grand Theft Audio.
Yeah, funny enough, the reason why I saw that and went, wow, was because going back to my earliest days professionally, working
Right.
as a writer and interviewing a lot of bands in those days. They're one of the first. I think that they may have been like my third ever feature.
Oh, right. Okay.
And like 10,000 articles in
Yeah.
the past was
Yeah.
Grand Theft Audio. I have to go through my archives. I think I even still have the feature I wrote on them. And I interviewed Jay. He was a singer, yeah?
Yeah. Jay's a singer. Yeah. Jay Butler. Yeah.
Yeah. I remember. And I think I even still have that cassette somewhere too. But I loved that album.
Oh, fantastic. Great record. Yeah. Real catchy songs. Production, Ralph's production. Ralph also passed away recently from cancer, and that's a real shame, but his production on that album was fantastic.
Very cool. Well, it's cool to know they're doing things more in the here and now because
Yeah, yeah, it was Jay and Rich were working on it. Yeah, I think Ralph had an involvement as well, but then he was sick. But yeah, it's great. We're all doing it. We're all coming out the woodwork and making more records.
yeah, well, that's great. I'll have to keep my eyes and ears open for that because I gotta track down that record. It's been a few years. This
Yeah,
is very ground floor stuff for me between that record and the Tricky EP. I mean, we're talking the early days of my career here, so
yeah, yeah.
very
Yeah,
cool.
most people like you've mentioned the tricky mission accomplished EP. That's not on many people's radar, because it wasn't an album, it was like a digipack, and
Right.
meant a lot to me. It was my first appearance on a tricky record, but to most folks, they don't really take notice of EPs and stuff like that. So yeah, for you to have that and be aware of that, and Grand Theft Audio, nobody ever asks me about Grand Theft Audio. I'm very happy to talk about all of this stuff. It's great.
Yeah, I gotta I have most of my archives piled up all over my apartment here.
Right.
Uh, I moved here right before COVID, thinking it would be temporarily, so I never really unpacked.
Mm.
5 years later, still the case. So everything's sort of piled up. But I gotta if I find that feature I wrote on them, I'll send it to you. I'll scan it and
Send
send
it.
it
Send
because
it over. Yeah, I'd like to see it. I've got a bunch of photos, like when Ralph passed, and it wasn't that long ago, so in the last couple of months, I went through my old photo archives, and I've got photos of the band like behind the scenes shots of them doing photo shoots in central London, and I was just like hanging out. I was there for the day and post pictures of us in pubs hanging out, and pictures that I took of them live. And yeah, it was a real trip down memory lane. You know, I picked like a really good picture of Ralph on stage that I'd taken, and I posted it in memoriam of him. You know, but yeah, yeah, no, there were some great times. We had such a blast hanging out back in London in the late 90s. It was brilliant, brilliant scene.
Yeah, I remember now thinking about the interview. He was a lot of fun. That was a nice
Yeah,
chat. You know,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
you get some guys who are on the press. I even get it now. You get guys who are just doing interviews and they're sitting there for 6 hours doing these 30-minute slices of conversations. It gets tiring. But I
yeah,
remember for him, he was just like, yeah, like he got this record
yeah,
and we were all pumped for that record in the office. Like, like this is gonna be one that's gonna fucking break, and things
yeah,
happen the way they happen. But I remember we were really high on that band at that time, the fall of 2000, or whatever it was.
yeah. I thought it was going to be huge, you know, and I guess it's just you can't second guess these things. Sometimes the stars just don't always align. I don't know why it didn't blow up bigger than it did, but the record is still out there, and if anybody's listening, just I'm sure it's on. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's on Spotify. So if you search Grand Theft Audio, um, I think the album's called Blame Everyone,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
there is not a bad track on that album. It's all just bangers. You know, it's great.
Yeah. I'll dig up what I can find online. I'll include a couple links in this video.
Yeah,
Because people should really check out that record. It was definitely one that got away from
yeah.
the era.
And they were amazing live as well. They were just like this real punk rock energy, you know, which was
Yeah.
great.
Yeah, it was
But
great stuff.
very heavy, you know.
Yeah, very cool. I'm glad that came up. That's
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Thank you for bringing it up.
Oh, definitely. So we began the conversation in the present with Seven Dials. I
Mm.
recently became aware of some things in the not too distant future, including Mr. Shane Embury from Napalm Death. You and Shane
Yeah,
have things in the works, yeah.
yeah. I always manage to surprise people with my with my resume and my collaborations, and Shane is going to add to that surprise. But yeah, because I've been working on a record with Shane and Johnny from Napalm Death. Along with my good friend Simon Effermy, who's singing on the project. It's called Absolute Power. And yeah, we're doing this like classic 80s, you know, metal. Think Judas Priest, think Scorpions, think, you know, Iron Maiden. It's that era of classic metal, which is kind of like my era, really, the era that really influenced me, you know, late 70s, early 80s. Was when I was listening to a lot of metal as a teenager. And yeah, so they invited me to record lead guitar on this new Absolute Power album. And yeah, I'm about 5 songs in, and it's sounding great. So yeah, I'm looking forward to sharing that with people. But I know that Napalm Death is just even bringing up that name is gonna mess with people's heads. But I love it.
Well, I mean, Shane's a pretty eclectic guy. He does
Yeah,
that
yeah,
Dark Sky Burial stuff, which is that
yeah,
being,
yeah, yeah,
that's that to me, because I just heard his most recent stuff in the last couple
yeah,
of months. It reminds me of Coil, like
yeah,
the guy from
yeah,
Napalm doing like this Coil type, like dark wave sort of thing, and he's
yeah,
not, you know.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's funny because they, you know, like they kind of they demo the music for these songs over in the West Midlands, and then they send me these demos, and I'm immediately transported to 15-year-old Mark, you know, in my bedroom with my Explorer-shaped Ibanez Destroyer, and I just immediately go into like new wave of British heavy metal lead guitar mode. It feels like, but it's like putting on a you know, it fits like a glove, I guess is the expression. You know, I just feel very natural doing it. So I've been having a lot of fun with that, you know.
Yeah, it's a funny thing, you're talking about that era and some of the cover choices you've made. It depends on where you grew up. I'm an 80s guy myself, so I love when bands cover those songs. And about this time last year, I had Ben on from the Sisters of Mercy, who, when
Oh,
he's not in full-on Sisters mode, he plays with a band in England. They do like Def Leppard covers,
yeah.
and all that stuff. So
Yeah, Ben's a good friend, and yeah, I know he has a great love of Leopard and all of those bands, and he loves him, with Vilo Vallo and Typo Negative and Bon Jovi. He's
yeah,
got
yeah.
likes all of that stuff, and his own band Diamond Black. He definitely brings those elements together, and it's very well put together. Great songs, yeah, Ben's a very talented guy, and of course, I know him through his work with the Sisters of
Yeah.
Mercy. We played festivals together. Christ, probably like 20 years ago now. Sort of struck up a friendship. Yeah,
Yeah, great guy, great guy. I mean, we could have done an entire interview just on the 80s stuff because
yeah,
after we stopped recording, we were talking about all that stuff. I said, check this out. And at the time I had a cassette on my desk of Slippery When Wet by Bon Jovi, the first
right.
cassette I ever bought when I was a kid. And I flashed it on the screen. He's like, oh my God, that's brilliant. And we were just rolling about like stadium rock.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. He loves all that stuff. Yeah, definitely. Yeah,
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's what it is. I mean, I always loved being exposed to as much music as I could. I never had a musical phase where it was like, here's my industrial phase, here's my goth phase. All that stuff, the Bauhauses, the Missions, sat very comfortably next to the Poisons and everything else in my record collection. It just happened to be music I liked, you know.
yeah. I listened to a lot of that stuff in the 80s as well, and everybody thinks I'm a goth kid, because I played in the Mission and I played in the Children and Peter Murphy and that, but like my early influences were like punk rock, like Pistols, Skids, Ruts, Damned, Generation X. I loved all that stuff, and but I also listened to Motorhead and
Yeah.
Scorpions and UFO and Judas Priest and all the metal stuff as well. Van Halen and stuff. Um, and all of that's still in me. You never truly escape your 15-year-old self. But getting back to Ben and that, the other thing we have in common is I played guitar for Ricky Warwick
Mm.
a, a, no, around 10 years ago now. I played on one of Ricky's albums and I ended up touring with him a few times. Ricky, to those who don't know, he's the singer from a band called The Almighty, British or Scottish band to be specific. And Ricky went on to be the frontman for Thin Lizzy, with Phil Lynott, God rest his soul. And so, yeah, I toured with Ricky for a few years. And then in more recent years, Ben has been on guitar with Ricky as well. So we've both got that in common as well.
Yeah, fantastic. Like I said earlier, it's a very small world when
Yeah, it
you
is.
when you get into it. And what's important to me, you're talking about some artists who've been in this 40 plus years. Paul, Chris has had a lot of decades behind him at this point. And they're still doing things relevant in the here and now. That Seven Dials record is as relevant as anything Chris and Paul did, back in.
Shameless plug.
Look at
Shameless
that.
plug for Sevendials with
Nice, it's nice looking vinyl, man.
Paul, Ferguson, Chris Conway, and some bloke, some goth bloke guitar. Yeah. But there you go. Oh yeah, and it's on a very snazzy metallic silver.
Oh, nice,
Yeah,
nice, nice,
yeah, it's really pretty. Yeah.
nice, nice. I'll have to get my copy, to help youth out, really, because Lord knows he needs the dosh. So
If you could help youth out, that guy, he needs some help. He's just struggling for work.
he's practically holding a
Do what you can.
point.
Do what you can, folks.
Fantastic. Well, so how we do? I think I covered most of the bases.
Yeah, I don't know. I lose track of who I've played with. Um, yeah, I guess. Yeah, the Wonder Stuff is a band that like I mentioned those guys. Yeah, I joined them about 6 years ago, and they're another band from the West Midlands, and I mentioned those guys because we're going to be back out on tour later this year. Um, we're going to do some shows in the UK in December, so that's going to be fun. I'm supposed to do some shows next month with Peter Murphy. We're supposed to do Forever Now in Milton Keynes Bowl in England, and then we're doing Luna Festival in Germany in August. So I'm looking forward to playing some shows with Peter again.
Excellent, excellent. Yeah, and I haven't had the opportunity to listen to it, I admit, but I have Peter's new album here.
Yeah,
So
Pete's got a new album called Silver Shade, very good, and I think you might know the guy that produced it.
a
Mark
starving artist. Yeah,
Youth, wasn't it? Yeah, yeah. So yeah, Eustace everywhere, isn't he?
it's
Wow.
it's crazy, it's and good for him, and certainly in Big Paul's case too, regardless of the future status of Killing Joke, it's nice to see, Paul in particular kind of do things. He had done it even in preceding years, but really now it seems like he's hit the ground running and he's really progressing under his own steam, which is really nice to see because those drums need to be heard, man.
Yeah, yeah. No, he's definitely lit a fire under the arse of the Sevendials album with his amazing drumming, and he's also got another band, Light of Eternity, which he actually was started work on, I don't know, about 6 months before Seven Dials. And yeah, they're going to be touring Ministry this summer, so that'll be great if you want to check Paul Ferguson drumming with Light of Eternity, supporting Ministry in Europe. Then those dates are coming up in a couple of months.
Fantastic. And as
Mm.
I said, there'll be plenty of links, information for the new Seven Dials album, your solo
Yeah,
work. I got to put some Grand Theft Audio up there as well for people to check out. And
yeah, yeah, definitely.
yeah, there'll be all sorts of stuff for people to run with beyond this.
All about Eve as well. Yeah, that's
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Uh,
definitely.
I mean, I'd love to see Julianne do like a big world tour and hit the States. I mean, that would be fantastic. Maybe you
Yeah,
could talk to her about that.
yeah. I think she's just a place in her life, and she's been working in I think she was working as a teacher for a while, and I think she's just in a place in her life where she's probably putting touring behind her, but she's still obviously got the passion to record vocals, which is great.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, I thank you for the years of music. I've been following your work for many years now. I love the fact that there's always great things happening in the present and the future. And my door is certainly always open, once things get rolling with Mr. Embury and or anything
Yeah,
else, or the 20 new projects to come next year. Uh,
yeah,
keep me looped in. Let me know what's going on, and
definitely.
we'll light this up again. We'll do a part two for sure.
Yeah, yeah, definitely, definitely. Sounds like a plan, Joel. Definitely.
In the meantime, thank you so much for coming on. It's been a real pleasure.
Yeah, my pleasure, mate. Thank you very much.